and it's the time for me to leave the stage and give it to Tiffany. Tiffany, where you are in my list. 1 second, and you are co-organizer now, co-host.
If I speak, does that help?
Yes, no, I found you. So you are co-host. So now it means you can share the screen. You can do whatever you want. It's stage is yours. Well, I have seen the message from you and Irina that, well, maybe you will not need full hour. It's absolutely fine. Feel free to finish at whatever time you need. We will have time for Q&A. I think there's like 60 people online now. Then maybe they will have some questions. And of course, well, you have lots of practical, like experience. So you have lots of things to share. Go on.
Thank you, M.Th. It's lovely to be here. And am I? Can you see me? Did it switch over? Okay, perfect. I'm okay. I don't want to look at myself. I just want to go into the slides. Thank you very much for your presentation, M.Th. I always love learning from you and the different aspects and things that you put together. So grateful for that. And everyone here, I always learn so much from each of our sharing. So super appreciate it. I'm going to go into the presentation. I will say that Dimitri mentioned that I have a lot of practical knowledge. Yes, because I operate in the world as a medical intuitive and as a clinician as far as in that world. And so I've been using the BioWell since it came out. But prior to that, it was in my introduction when I was at graduate seminary at Holos. So it's been 17 years actually of using this technology. So I'm going to weave together a little story. Let me go into sharing here and going into presentation mode. So this looks very busy, but I'll break it down. So essentially, I'm going to be presenting on my PhD dissertation that I just completed. Took some time, and I am grateful for my beloved husband because I would still be writing or trying to munge the stats. So for his name is Paul Mills, Dr. Paul Mills. I'm grateful. So the effects of sacred space on the human biofield. Actually, it's not sacred space. I wrote that as a habit. It's sacred objects. Goodness. So I'm Tiffany Barsotti. The manuscript is actually published for scientific publication now, so we're just waiting to hear back from the journal. These things kind of take the time that they take. I also want to present the impact of doing this research on my life, really. I think as researchers and certainly as clinicians, we are affected by the people that we work with, but you don't often think about research having a personal impact on us, and it did. So everyone here is probably pretty familiar with the energy field image. This is the star path of where we took these measurements, which I'm going to go into detail on in Petersburg, India. So I'm going to go, like I said, weave together a little backstory. And isn't this always true? More research required. I mean, we end every paper that way. So the story sort of begins when, actually, it's when I first met you, Dimitri, in 2010 for the Russian Congress. Konstantin invited me to speak there on my master's thesis, which I wrote 11 years ago. So this was obviously prior to having the BioWell, which I am grateful for because it has really unified so much of the software. But this was my presentation. It was essentially a theory of physiology of presence and transcendence. And the title is a bit of a mouthful, I realize, but it is how the reticular activating system, the RAS, the vagus nerve, and the alta major chakra axis may be the nexus of body, mind, spirit consciousness. The alta major chakra lines up at the back of the head at the top of the neck, where the skull and the neck meet. And it is known as the mouth of God in many cosmologies. So next part of the story is, after doing the training and spending some time in St. Petersburg, I went with a friend of mine and we traveled around Moscow. And we were able to get into the Kremlin, and we went to the Cathedral of Annunciation. And it had not been opened, or it had been open on and off. They've had many fires there on and off. And so many of the murals in there had been destroyed. And yet it was a very, very consecrated space. So it was rather remarkable. So I happened to be there when this reopened, and it's just kind of an amazing feat. So personal impact number one is literally my camera was shaking out of my hands because, of course, security guards come and scare the crap out of you in Russia when you're taking pictures of things that you're not sure you're supposed to be taking pictures of, and then you get yelled at or whatever could be happening. But the master's thesis dealt with these triangles, and the triangles of these connections, and they're multiple throughout the body from an esoteric healing standpoint. So this image here is Archangel Gabriel having mudras, and I cut off his other hand in my nervousness of taking a picture. And it's very muted because there's been so many fires and so much destruction to the murals and the paintings there. And that's Church Slavonic that is above the head of Archangel Michael, of Archangel Gabriel. I've never seen any of the archangels, or really any of the deities, presented with a triangle. And also how the intersection is right at this area at the base of the skull. So all of these breadcrumbs, I really believe if we follow the breadcrumbs, we will end up being well fed, because we are following our inspiration to go to the next level of whatever is next. So putting this detail together was also fascinating, because I happened to be the 4-year-old child or 5-year-old child that was measured when my mom was in a class with Thelma Moss, and she was essentially looking at how to replicate the studies that were in this book of the psychic discoveries behind the Iron Curtain. So how fascinating is it? Her hypothesis was that if you put a child with their parents, that the child's energy field from a Kirlian photography standpoint will overtake that of the parents. And that is actually what happened. But the person, John Hubacher, who did the experiments for Dr. Moss at the time, he had a fire, and so he doesn't have those images anymore for me to use. But we've spoken about that because he remembers it also. It was kind of a cutting edge thing, especially to be done at UCLA. So I just think this is fascinating, how coming full circle in my life, that now we have a reliable, subtle energy stress device in a way that we are able to measure perceptions, consciousness, different activities that would be going on in our bodies. And I've been a very sensitive person since I was a child. And so this was, anyway, just coming full circle. It's just a real opportunity as I see it. So the next breadcrumb is this India trip that came up for a bunch of us researchers, and this is not even our full clan, but it's the group of us that got to travel to this beautiful place in Petersburg. And I'll show you some pictures here in a moment, more pictures. There's been studies on sacred sites, but not from a biofield sciences perspective. So really, this is kind of a novel way of looking at what are the effects of a sacred object on a human. And so this picture here is what is affectionately called the Durga Stone. It's a Sri Yantra, and they've had many, many, many pujas and consecrations, and it's built up on these other stones and pedestal there. So you actually stand at it and recite a mantra. So Mimi and Rowney, these were Mimi Guarnari and Rowney Pritton King are friends, but also colleagues in the field. And they've long followed Constantine and the life of Kirlian photography and where this has gone for biofield sciences. Mimi Guarnari is a physician, cardiologist actually, they have been going to this location in Pedem for several years. They said that they had prior experiences when we were having some scientific meetings of what were we going to be able to do if we got an IRB, what kind of things could we do as a group there? So they tell me about this Durga stone. And then this is impact number 3, that I've been called Durga since I was 10 years old. So it's just like, you know, my skin lights up with a feeling of an opportunity. And so that's what happened. So we got our IRB from the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and we had a heartfelt intention to measure what we are going to find in this sacred space. So this is it's actually a golden temple. This is all what you see on the top picture is all made of gold. It's tremendous. And this is you can see the golden temple from the top view and this star path. So in this image, this star path amazingly was created with no architectural plans. The Sri Lakshmi Amma Narayani, who is a male, but vibrates to the triple goddess. This is not the Amma as the hugging saint or hugging guru, but he had given, or she had given, directions from an inspiration for divine impressions. And the Durga stone is located right here at the first like pinnacle, because when you go, if you're going to make your way all the way to the Golden Temple, then you are going to have to walk all the way around the star path in order to get there. So that in itself is like, in Tibet, they call it walking the Kora. You're actually in a very contemplative place as you walk all through this covered area. And there's signs everywhere about just giving spiritual wisdom and insights as to what some of the experience is that you might have while you're there. So the translation of the mantra is, I surrender to the Supreme Mother. And this is the way it's depicted right here. This is Rajima, this amazing woman who was our guide and made this all be possible, because obviously we had to get permission. But our days were dwindling there. So this was really challenging, because are we going to get enough people? We had done a pre-test where we saw that this would be an amazing place for us to be able to, sorry, I was just hearing some noise and being distracted. So this was an amazing place for us to be able to get actual measurements. So the sacred site, we got confirmed that we could actually get the measurements there. But this was an act of surrender we were there for 2 weeks before we got to do the large group of 17 people. So we needed enough people to be able to come together, because we already knew from the pilot, this is what we wanted to focus on. So with only 3 more days there, the design actually came together as we were putting these details together. So it was pretty much a straightforward design with pre and post experiences with 3 aims. The 3 specific aims were a series of, there's 3 hypotheses that accompany each other. So Dr. Guarnari and her colleague, as I mentioned, already had previous experience of the Durga stone and thought that that could be where we could focus our energies. So the first study was a priori, we had already decided to examine the effects of the stone on with the biowell's emotional pressure parameters or stress. It was called emotional pressure at the time when those experiments were taken. And of course, the energy variables. So the specific aim is to examine the study participants' emotional pressure and stress readings in response to exposure. The Durga stone, Sri Yantra, one and the same, obviously. So the primary hypothesis was that the emotional pressure would decrease and overall energy and left-right symmetry balance will significantly following their exposure to the Durga stone, Sri Yantra, as compared to their initial baseline. Excuse me, I need to close the door. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so then the specific aim is that the second aim of this being specific is to examine the organ systems and see exactly where in the body we would actually experience any potential change. So we wanted to analyze the organ systems to show. My hypothesis was that it would likely increase at the head, and also I didn't know where else, but I thought that the organ systems would be, we would have enough parameters there to be statistically significant for pre and post. And then the third aim was that we had a exploratory hypothesis of the chakra measurements. So we examined all of the participants. There were 17 in the in the assessments. And the exploratory hypothesis studies, the participants showed that there were increases in energy and alignment, and potentially greater significance will be in the chakras from the waist up following their exposure to the Durga stone because of the mantra. So I thought waist up would be where we would potentially see the most. So here's what happened. These are going into some of the statistics because there were many. But we did repeated measures. ANOVA was used to 3 measurements and 3 time points. So also with pairwise comparisons were run with the ANOVA. And then it was a sample size of 17 people. So the outcomes as related to the primary hypothesis, the emotional pressure and stress parameter overall, this parameter was significantly increased across all of the assessments. So yay, we got statistical significance. While clinically significant, these results are the opposite of the hypothesis though. I was believing that there would be a calming effect, being especially that the mantra was all about surrender, and the overall stress measurements ultimately showed that there was an increase. So it made me think about, okay, the good stress, the so-called EU stress versus distress, that this is an important distinction in our work with the BioWell. So this is something to really think about when we see an increase in the parameter. What is actually causing the stress? And getting that insight is really, really helpful by asking questions. So here's what it looks like from a statistical point of view. The stress parameter significantly increased post-exposure. So we see the measurement at baseline, and then we see pre, and this is for all 17 people as an aggregate total here. And then we can see that the increase post was actually statistically significant. So the analysis of the aggregate measures in this variable is slightly increased, primarily from the initial baseline, but also in the pre-test. So showing that, you know, maybe there was an acclimation to the space. There could have been things that we were getting used to, being that we were at an ashram, things like that, because the measurements, like I said, had been taken over several people for several days. So commenting on the statistics here, this observed increase in the energy range from the initial, just as an example, 53 to a final of 66 is highly significant in the sense that, based on my personal practice, it takes some significant influence to induce a 13-point increase in this energy state within a few minutes. So it's really showing that something was happening as a result of this. Now, in contrast to that, to the emotional pressure or stress is the left-right symmetry or balance. It was not statistically changed or significant in that regard. And I really attribute that to really the more stability that the people had that were in this study. Their optimal range was pretty much met throughout. I am going to show you one person in a moment where his was a little bit different, but there really isn't much room to increase or decrease if you are having a state change. So with healthy people, the more erratic the change, the more you may want to question what's actually going on in the person's nervous system. So this graph is actually showing us that the left-right balance symmetry, it actually slightly went down, but it's for the post. So once again, across all 3 time spaces of our measurements, that the parameter really was not statistically significant. So it dropped a little bit, but nothing to write home about. So with the still regards into the primary hypothesis, one of the variables that we looked at, as I explained, this is pre-Durga Stone Experience. So we see that in BioWell, most everyone here is familiar with this screen of what this looks like. And this is essentially the aggregate data for looking at a snapshot in time for what's going on across multiple parameters in the software. So the blue line is the measurement and the colorful lines are the actual scale. So everything is in the optimal range here for this person. Well, the post, here's the post that we're looking at. This is what busted my hypothesis, but it still ended up being statistically significant. So this is, we've got heightened energy, we've got higher stress, but the balance did go down a little bit. And so I would need to dig more into that person's experience in order to really understand why that would happen. But ultimately, you can see that there was a massive increase for this person. Okay, so some outcomes related to the secondary hypothesis. So the secondary hypothesis were directed at examining the effects of exposure to the Durga stone and on the different organ systems. So what we found is that there was a statistical significance across all 3 time points, but really primarily for the head and cardiovascular systems where the significant elevated post-exposure was evident from compared to the pre-exposure and certainly the baseline. This is for the head. I was thinking that this would sort of be expected because there's a focus on the task at hand. So what you're doing at the Durga stone is putting your hand on the Durga stone and another hand behind you while reciting a mantra. And so that because that mantra recitation is going on, it allows some concentration. So the mantra in Sanskrit is Om Maha Devaya Sharanam. I'm not saying that super well, but many of you who are Indian here are probably going to lasso me. But anyway, which it translates, I surrender to the Supreme Mother. So you repeat this over and over again for 3 minutes. That's the allowed time, which is actually a limitation to this study as well. So I'll discuss those in a bit. So outcomes as related to the secondary hypothesis, while all the organs and systems showed some type of statistical significance for a change across the various measures, the cardiovascular and the head systems were the ones that increased across all 3 measures. So this, also considering this is within my personal experience of this whole experiment required surrender. And that's a real challenge to a researcher, that you are trying to control your outcomes as much as possible, not necessarily outcomes, but control your experiment as much as possible. So you don't think of necessarily surrendering at the same time as trying to make all of these parameters come together so that you can carry out research. But this was a really, really good lesson. And I stayed with the pujas. I stayed with all of the sacred ceremonies that were going on there. And I also kept reciting the mantra to myself. So the effects on me were pretty profound as just needing to let go. The last thing I'll bring your attention to here is in the exploratory hypothesis section, there was a similar data outcome with an increase of the chakras across the whole group. So these were the 2 areas, as I mentioned, for the cardiovascular and the head, and as you can see for the measurements here, these were the ones across all 3 assessments that showed statistical significance for all 17 people as well. So this is an example. In the paper, there is a table that's enumerated, and I believe that this is being made available on the website as well. So the paper that is in, we changed it a little bit so that we didn't have to include so much about the BioWell, given most of the population here already knows about BioWell. So we were able to keep it reduced in size for that reason. So as most everyone also here knows, that the parameters in our database changed. So when I went to go take these snapshots, these are not how I saw them when we did the initial measurements, but it still, of course, is going to show an example of the significant increase. So this is pre-Durga Stone Experience. Everything is all in the green. And then we see this heightened activity here, really, like I said, across all of the parameters, but the most notable were the head and the cardiovascular. And then the scale for BioWell is 2 phases of low, a norm range, and 2 phases of high. So the outcomes as related to the exploratory hypothesis are revealed that the chakras were increased in response to the Durga Stone or Sri Yantra. However, the alignment was not significant across the group. So the lack of any change in alignment is actually really a good thing, because that also speaks to the stability of the people that we were measuring. If we see the alignment constantly moving in a statistically significant way, then that actually can give us a clue about a person's nervous system stability and maybe further insights into what is going on in the subtext or their mindset, having a lot to do with that, as well as everything else that Dmitry was listing in his presentation, really important points. So what we see on the left here is the pre-Durga Stone Experience. And I just took a snapshot of one person because I found that this was so telling as being in images of being able to see these changes. So we can see over here, when we're talking, this is the heart area within the Biofield's depiction, the energy field. And then this is post Durga Stone Experiences, and we can see this heart change. And I also left in this color here, this extra light. At first I was deleting it on people, and then I was like, wow, I'm taking all the precautions, use dark, what do you call it, covers over people's hands. It was actually not super bright out, and anyway, this light was much more present in people's scans after the experience with the Durga Stone. And then here I just listed the energy values for all of them for a quick visual to be able to see the massive increase. And so this is the light increase, of course, that makes that jump up in number. So also throughout this study, I was taking account somewhat of people's experiences in the notes section, which is, I'm so grateful to have that when we're out in the field doing experiments. So this is the subjective notes from this person, the initials of RH. He felt no dramatic experience. He felt that he went deep into the energy vortex below the stone. No temperature change, but a deepening and a grounding to the field below. So this was interesting. He's a scientist as well. And yes, I would say sensitive in some regards, but that wasn't his experience. Other people had very different experiences. And this is actually a limitation of the study as well, because I did not get people's religious beliefs or what actually made them believe anything about surrendering to the Divine Mother or across the group there. So this is a key from Freddie Silva from one of his publications that was published in 2016. The intention as the human key. This is something that was very purposeful before the trip began, that we sought out as scientists to be in a space that is considered sacred, and then let's see what the effects of it are on humans. And so I'm grateful to have the BioWell to be able to measure such things. So one of his 7 principles of what makes a site sacred, and the other 6 are the electromagnetics, the water, sacred measurement, he calls it the megalithic yard, which is 2.72 feet. Sorry, I didn't do it in metric. This stone, the presence of stone, and sacred geometry, and then the orientation as in directions. So all of these things, according to Freddie Silva's research, are involved in what makes a site be sacred. And then the human key is, what intention are you intending to have as you are in this sacred site? So for us, we had the stone present, we had sacred geometry present, and we had the orientation of directions. I have no idea if this met the megalithic yard. There were two of us that were also dowsing out there, and we came to that exact point with our dowsing rods to be able to see right in alignment with where the Durga stone actually sits. So some of you may know Dr. Shamini Jan, and then this is my husband, Dr. Paul Mills. Shamini runs an organization called Chi. The website is chi.is, Chi is, and it stands for Consciousness Healing Initiative. And Paul was her mentor when she was in her graduate program. And then Rajima, so she's a lovely woman that made all of these possible, these measurements be possible. So we happened to also be there during the time of Diwali. So this celebration of, I think it was 10,000 candles that made a Sri Yantra. So just looking to align myself in this hall, and we had to move this inside because it was raining out. So this is just me taking experiments. Most of the time they began at 4 in the morning, and we didn't get much sleep there. Everything had to be before the whole place opened, the star path opened for the public. So taking measurements prior to anyone walking around there was part of the requirements that we wanted. So obviously we're seated here because we just got done doing a lot of mantra chanting. We know that we don't take measurements seated, but this woman was just wanting to experience it. So it was not for scientific measure. And lastly, the personal impact was this lovely man. Really, he goes as woman because he vibrates to this triple goddess, is the exploring and experimenting and just getting to have an experience doing this. And we did water experiments. We used the Sputnik in many places. And the thing that showed the most promise to do research with was the experience at the Durga Stone. So strengths and weaknesses, we were all staying in the same place. This was a strength, eating the same foods, having similar exposures to the on-site experiences. So these were not people that were retreating into their own spaces. Everyone that was part of this study, we lived essentially in the same spot. So baselines were measured off-site, meaning off of the actual sacred site of where the measurements were taken. And then a majority of participants had never had a Durga Stone experience, so they were fresh to it. And then, of course, repeated testing that we got to do as like a mini pilot to see the validity if we were going to be able to see whether or not this was going to be a good study for us to pursue. And then the weakness is that it was a modest sample size. We only had 17 people. That a control site, a non-sacred site, would be ideal to do comparisons and with the same participants, if at all possible. And then there was a limitation of having only 3 minutes exposure at the Durga Stone. There's an attendant that is there that monitors and makes sure that you're not hogging up all the time there. So the personal or religious beliefs were not factored in, and that is a limitation. So future research, always research begets research. We'd like to go back to India and do more on that same site, and then adding other sites, as well as adding the measurements from Sputnik. And to measure, I have an invitation actually to go and study with the Chumash. They have specific special stones that they use, and they're located off an island off the coast of California. And I would be interested in measuring both people and also the Sputnik. And as usual, more research required. So thank you. Spasibo. Danke. Grazie. Merci. I am super grateful to all of our BioWell community and the opportunity that we get to do such incredible science together. So thank you. Thank you for your attention as well.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. That was awesome. Awesome. It's been a repetition partially for me because I have heard some of your results already before. But anyway, I like such kind of research, and well, the efforts that you have put in it, well, much appreciated, much appreciated. Well, if there are any questions, people are welcome to ask now, because we have a little bit of time reserved, but I can see that Maya and Andolfo are already connected, so maybe they can you know, start presenting now.